Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about the most lavish events of the 19th century? Victorian dinner parties still seem to us to be the epitome of absolute elegance and impeccable taste. In history textbooks, everything looks perfect. Beautiful ladies in lavish gowns sit demurely at tables adorned with sparkling crystal, while noble gentlemen in tailcoats engage in polite small talk by the flickering light of hundreds of candles. A picture-perfect scene, isn't it? But what if all this impeccable luxury was just a beautiful facade hiding a real nightmare? In this video, the creators will reveal what historical films usually keep quiet about. You'll see how long hours at the banquet table turned into a grueling test of physical endurance for the elite, bordering on torture. Be sure to watch this episode all the way through, because the finale will reveal the dirtiest and most scandalous secret of Victorian etiquette, which will make you glad you live in the 21st century. You definitely didn't expect to hear that. What I'm about to reveal is banned from official historical records. The reality of formal gatherings differed greatly from the romanticized images of the past. The main problem with large gatherings was the incredibly foul odors in enclosed spaces. People of that era rarely bathed thoroughly due to the hardships of daily life. A bath was considered a rare treat and required the efforts of an entire staff of servants. Hot water had to be heated for a long time on a huge kitchen stove. Daily hygiene was limited to simply wiping the face and hands with water from a porcelain jug. Bodies were hidden under multiple layers of thick fabric for hours on end. The natural odors of the human body quickly accumulated under tight corsets and woolen frock coats. Washing outer garments was absolutely impossible due to the delicacy of velvet and silk. Expensive dresses were merely aired out by an open window and cleaned with stiff brushes. To mask body odor, guests used incredibly heavy perfumes. Sharp scents of musk, patchouli, and strong rose water were in vogue. These perfumes were applied in vast quantities to the hair, neck, and wrists. Mixing with the smell of sweat in a warm room, the perfume created a suffocating atmosphere. It was very difficult to breathe such heavy air throughout the entire dinner. The scent of the perfume was mingled with the pungent smell of tobacco smoke. Gentlemen often smoked strong cigars before dinner began and immediately afterward. The smell of tobacco permeated the woolen fabrics of men's suits and the upholstery of the furniture. The thick velvet curtains in the dining room also absorbed all the lingering scents. No ventilation could quickly clear the room of this heavy mixture. Gas lighting in the formal halls was a separate source of unpleasant odors. Gas lamps emitted a distinct sulfuric smell when burning continuously. This smell settled on the guest's hair and even on the exquisite dishes being served. The heat from the lamps caused the sense of perfume and food to intensify even further. As a result, the air in the dining room became thick and oppressive. Layered clothing served as a veritable trap for all the surrounding scents. Women's dresses consisted of petticoats, crinolines, bustles, and stiff bodices. The fabrics instantly absorbed the smells of food, candles, and neighboring guests. Upon returning home, a society lady carried the entire spectrum of scents from the dinner party on her dress. Getting rid of this trail was practically impossible until the next long airing. The servants, who were constantly in the hall, also contributed to the overall atmosphere. They brought with them the smells of the hot kitchen, coal, and roasted meat. Footmen in heavy liveries quickly broke a sweat, carrying huge trays between the tables. Their clothes were rarely washed as the woolen uniforms were very expensive. The guests tried not to pay attention to these smells, observing strict rules of decorum. The food on the table exuded its own, sometimes quite pungent culinary aromas. The fashion for exotic spices and hot sauces led to pungent smells. Hot broths, roasted meat, and aged cheeses smelled very intensely. Combined with perfumes and gas lamps, this created a powerful sensory assault. The guests' senses were already overwhelmed within the first hour of the formal banquet. Opening windows during dinner was strictly forbidden by strict social etiquette. It was believed that a fresh breeze could ruin the ladies' hairstyles and cool down the hot dishes. Moreover, drafts caused a quiet panic due to the fear of catching a cold. As a result, dozens of people spent hours in the hermetically sealed space of the room. The atmosphere grew increasingly stifling with each new course served. Only someone with a very strong constitution could endure such an ordeal of smells. Newcomers to social gatherings often felt nauseous from the lack of fresh oxygen. However, the rules of etiquette required maintaining a serene expression until the very end. I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think about such harsh conditions? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos about the mysteries of the past. What if I showed you the guests' true faces, hidden behind their forced social graces? The perfect Snow White smiles in old portraits are the result of artists' work. In reality, the state of the teeth among the wealthiest people was simply dismal. Dentistry was in its infancy and did more harm than good. Treatment often boiled down to simple extraction without reliable pain relief. The main enemy of healthy teeth at Victorian dinners was white sugar. This product was expensive and considered a symbol of high social status. Wealthy hosts tried to add sugar to absolutely every dish served. Sweet pies, candied fruits, and syrups were a constant presence on banquet tables. Such a diet rapidly destroyed the tooth enamel of even the most distinguished guests. Black, decayed teeth paradoxically served as a sign of immense wealth. Poor people could not afford sweets, so their teeth remained intact. Aristocrats, on the other hand, proudly displayed the consequences of consuming expensive cane sugar. However, over time, aesthetic standards began to change for the better. Society ladies became self-conscious about their teeth and tried to keep their mouths closed. This is precisely why people in many early photographs maintain a serious expression. A broad smile was considered bad form and a sign of humble, non-aristocratic origins. Guests at formal dinners were expected to laugh very restrainedly and quietly. They tried to keep their lips tightly pressed together to hide the absence of their front teeth. This forced facial expression made the guests' faces look tense and unnaturally stern. The dentures of that time were highly imperfect devices. They were carved from ivory or wood with alarming inaccuracy. Such prostheses rubbed against the gums and caused constant discomfort with every movement. Chewing solid food with such devices in one's mouth was practically impossible. Many guests preferred to simply swallow soft food without chewing it. Oral hygiene also left much to be desired before going out in public. Instead of toothpaste, people used coarse powders made from ground charcoal or chalk. These abrasive mixtures mercilessly wore away the remaining healthy enamel along with the plaque. Toothbrushes were made of stiff bristles, which severely injured the delicate gums. The process of brushing teeth often turned into a painful and unpleasant procedure. Most guests had very distinct and strong bad breath. The constant consumption of onions, garlic, and rich meats exacerbated this problem. To mask the odor, aristocrats constantly chewed on cloves or cardamom seeds. Special silver bowls filled with aromatic seeds were often placed on the tables. These seeds helped to at least somewhat freshen the breath during long conversations. Conversation at the table required maintaining a strict distance between diners. Getting too close to a neighbor's face was considered the height of bad manners and poor taste. This rule of etiquette was dictated not only by politeness, but also by practicality. Protecting one's own sense of smell played a crucial role in social interactions. No one wanted to smell their neighbor's breath during an exquisite meal. A dinner party turned into a complex performance where every guest carefully concealed their physical imperfections. Behind light social conversation lay constant discomfort, missing teeth, and inner self-consciousness. Maintaining the illusion of flawless beauty for 4 hours was incredibly difficult. Do you think this high social status was worth such sacrifices to one's own health? In the next chapter, you will learn what culinary challenges awaited guests at the formal table. The secret that people pay thousands for in expensive restaurants used to be a real ordeal. The Victorian menu was astonishing in its scale and incredible calorie count. A typical formal dinner consisted of at least 12, and sometimes as many as 20, courses. It was impossible to refuse the food. Doing so was considered a personal insult to the hosts. Guests had to taste every dish, even if they were completely full. Thick, rich soups made with fatty meat broths were always served first. These were followed by fish dishes, generously doused in thick, creamy sauces. Then came the turn of heavy roasted meats, game, and stuffed poultry. The portions were enormous as the hosts sought to demonstrate their wealth. The table was literally groaning under the weight of abundance, overwhelming the guests with its majestic appearance. During the Victorian era, vegetables were subjected to prolonged and relentless heat treatment. They were boiled until they became a soft, homogeneous, and completely tasteless mush. Fresh, crisp vegetables were considered too simple and a sign of a poor peasant's table. As a result, carrots, cabbage, and peas completely lost their color and natural texture. These side dishes were generously doused in melted butter to give them at least some flavor. Exotic dishes on the table played a key role in affirming the host's status. Serving ordinary beef or pork at a formal dinner was considered bad form. The menu often included rare varieties of fish, elaborate pâté, and exotic fruits. Intricate presentation transformed the food into a complex architectural structure on the plate. Chefs spent hours building towers of jelly, meat, and colorful garnishes. Gelatin was used in practically every possible dish of the time. Vegetables, fish, meat trimmings, and sweet fruit desserts were set in it. These transparent, wobbly towers looked impressive, but had a very distinctive taste. Producing gelatin was a lengthy process involving the prolonged boiling of bones and cartilage. The food took on a glue-like aftertaste, which was masked by an abundance of sugar and spices. The heaviness of these dishes placed a tremendous strain on the guests' digestive systems. The combination of fish, fatty meat, sweet creams, and jellies led to severe discomfort. Guests were forced to sit with their backs straight, suppressing the unpleasant sensations in their stomachs. The ladies' tight corsets made the digestive process even more difficult and slow, but etiquette demanded that they continue to smile and praise the chef's culinary talents. The abundance of sugar in desserts reached the point of complete culinary absurdity. Candied fruits, lollipops, puddings, and multi-tiered cakes capped off this gastronomic marathon. Sweets were even served between main meat courses to cleanse the palate. Such a carbohydrate overload caused sudden drowsiness and a heavy feeling throughout the body. Guests had to drink strong tea just to stay alert. Leaving food uneaten on one's plate was considered a completely improper act. A guest was expected to eat what was offered, demonstrating respect for the host's home. The hosts kept a close eye on the servants to ensure they refilled plates and glasses in a timely manner. The act of eating turned into a laborious mechanical task devoid of any pleasure. Many aristocrats secretly fasted for an entire day before such an important social gathering. The cutlery of that time also added to the complexity of the meal. There were dozens of types of forks, spoons, and knives for completely different foods. A mistake in choosing the right fork could cost a guest their social reputation. The cutlery was heavy, often made of solid family silver alloy. Using these tools required incredible concentration throughout the entire evening. Dinner turned into a test of stomach capacity and knowledge of table etiquette. People left the table feeling incredibly physically heavy. Lavish food brought no joy, becoming merely a tool of social pressure. If you were surprised by these strange and frightening culinary traditions of the past, please like this video. Your likes help us create even more interesting historical content. The lack of modern refrigerators made food storage an incredibly difficult task. Meat was stored in cool cellars, layered with massive chunks of crushed ice. The ice melted quickly, and food began to spoil rapidly during the warmer months. Cooks often had to work with meat that had lost its freshness. Strict sanitary standards and food quality inspections simply did not exist back then. The spoiled taste of the meat was masked with a huge amount of pungent spices. Thick sauces made from vinegar, pepper, and mustard reliably concealed any unpleasant aftertaste. Generous additions of salt also helped slow down the process of the food's final spoilage. Dinner guests rarely suspected the true condition of the beef served to them. The distinctive flavor was attributed to complex French recipes and the head chef's skill. The water in kitchens was often cloudy and required prolonged boiling. Dishes were washed in huge basins with the addition of harsh alkaline soap. Often the same water was used to wash dozens of plates in a row. Dish towels quickly became damp and were rarely changed in time. The cleanliness of the plates was maintained only visually until the first characteristic squeak. Table surfaces were made of soft wood that absorbed meat juices. Cutting boards were rarely scraped down to a pristine condition due to the servants' lack of time. The same tables were used for filleting fish, chopping beef, and kneading sweet dough. The concept of cross-contamination in 19th century cooking simply did not exist. Bacteria moved freely from raw ingredients to already prepared culinary masterpieces. The hygiene of the kitchen staff themselves was also very poor. Cooks worked 14 hours a day, constantly confined to a stuffy room. They rarely washed their hands while cooking, moving from one ingredient to another. By the middle of a long workday, their aprons were already covered in layers of grease and soot. Drops of sweat inevitably fell into huge open pots of boiling soup. Copper cookware posed a separate hidden health hazard to guests. If copper pots were not lined with a layer of tin on the inside, they would quickly oxidize. Highly acidic foods would react chemically with the metal of the cookware. The dishes took on a dangerous metallic taste and caused severe digestive upset. Cleaning the vast arsenal of copper pans required tremendous physical effort from the kitchen staff. Huge stocks of flour and grains were stored in dark pantries in simple sacks. These stocks often became damp and covered with mold due to the dampness of the basement rooms. Cooks simply removed the top spoiled layer, using the rest of the grain for baking. The quality of the bread and pies depended heavily on how dry the current summer season was. Guests at the table enjoyed fresh baked goods, unaware of the unpleasant details of their preparation. Delivering food from the cellar to the grand dining room took an incredibly long time. Dishes were hoisted up on special wooden lifts or carried up steep, narrow staircases. By the time they arrived, hot soups and sauces had cooled noticeably and lost their texture. To keep them warm, plates were covered with massive metal cloches. Condensation would collect under these cloches and drip back onto the exquisite culinary creations. The risk of contracting a serious foodborne illness at a dinner party was extremely high. The luxurious facade concealed unpredictable and frightening kitchen unsanitary conditions. The formal dishes looked magnificent, but their contents often left much to be desired. Could you enjoy the food, knowing about such harsh conditions in which it was prepared? In the next chapter, you will learn how guests coped with the terrible lack of air in the dining rooms. The air in Victorian-era formal dining rooms quickly became heavy and stifling. The main cause of the stuffiness was the widespread use of gas lamps and thick wax candles. Huge chandeliers with dozens of open flames literally burned the oxygen out of the room. Each burning candle emitted heat and carbon dioxide, filling the upper part of the room. In halls with high ceilings, this effect created an invisible, stifling heat cushion. Gas lighting was a symbol of progress, but it came with enormous inconveniences. Open gas burners burned with a slight hiss and emitted an incredible amount of heat. The air around them quickly overheated, creating a temperature imbalance in the enclosed space. People sitting directly under the chandelier began to get headaches after just an hour. The windows always remained tightly shut due to a panic-stricken fear of nighttime drafts. The heat from the ceiling lamps was compounded by the warmth from the huge fireplaces blazing in the dining room. The hosts lit the fireplaces to create the cozy atmosphere of a wealthy and hospitable home. However, the combination of burning firewood, Dozens of candles and gas lighting turned the room into an oven. The temperature in the room rose steadily with every passing minute of the long dinner party. In thick, layered clothing, this heat was felt particularly acutely and painfully. The smoke from countless candles was another serious problem for the guests' breathing. Even the highest quality wax candles would occasionally smoke and emit fine soot. This fine smoke settled on surfaces and fabrics and irritated the respiratory tract. The guests' eyes began to water and redden from being constantly in the smoky room. The women fanned themselves with fans, but this only circulated the warm air in a circle. Heavy velvet curtains on the windows completely blocked any natural air circulation. The architecture of many mansions did not include a well-designed ventilation system for large gatherings of people. The halls were designed for visual grandeur, not for the physical comfort of the guests. The dense fabrics of the carpets and draperies absorbed dust and prevented the heated room from cooling down. The space turned into an airtight box, filled with human breath and the heat of the lamps. The lack of oxygen caused the evening's guests to feel extremely drowsy. Maintaining lively social conversation became increasingly difficult with each course. Voices grew quieter, and the guests' movements lost their initial lightness and energy. The brain suffered from a lack of air, forcing people to fight the urge to close their eyes. Etiquette strictly forbade yawning or showing physical fatigue in front of the hosts. Some guests simply could not withstand such intense heat and oxygen deprivation. Many began to experience a racing heart, severe paleness, and dizziness. People had to leave the ballroom in a hurry, citing a sudden mild indisposition. Footmen escorted the weakened guests into the cool corridors so they could recover. Such incidents were considered unpleasant, but quite common at long formal dinners. The enormous arrangements of fresh flowers on the tables were also consuming what little fresh oxygen remained. The strong floral scents of lilies and roses became overwhelmingly heavy in the stuffy air. The pollen further irritated the nasal passages, triggering hidden allergic reactions among the guests. The guests could not move these massive decorations away from themselves, as that would have disrupted the table setting. All they could do was endure this suffocating floral captivity throughout the entire feast. Servants, constantly moving about the hall, kicked up invisible dust from the carpets with their feet. The movement of dozens of people in a confined space stirred up the tiniest particles of pile. This dry dust mixed with soot from the candles and settled imperceptibly in the lungs. It was simply physically impossible for the young men to take a full breath in such a stifling atmosphere. The air seemed thick, incredibly dense, and noticeably heavy to the taste. By the end of dinner, the atmosphere in the dining room resembled a hot and very dusty greenhouse. Stepping out of that room into the cool hall was a true relief for the guests. People greedily inhaled the fresh air, feeling incredible relief after their long confinement. This sharp contrast in temperatures only underscored just how unbearable the conditions inside the hall had been. The guests' patience was truly boundless, for they kept returning for such evenings again and again.
Relief is a wonderful thing.
What lies behind the pretty pictures in 19th century fashion magazines is quite frightening. Men's and women's fashion of that time was a true test of physical endurance. Preparations for a formal soiree began several hours before leaving the house. Clothing was not designed for comfort. It served solely to demonstrate social status. Guests willingly encased themselves in stiff layers of fabric, whalebone, and starch. The female silhouette was shaped using incredibly tight and very rigid corsets. These structures were laced so tightly by maids that the ribs literally shifted position. The corset prevented a woman from taking a full, deep breath or relaxing her back. Lung capacity was artificially reduced, leading to a constant lack of oxygen in the blood. One had to sit at the table in such a shell absolutely upright without leaning back. Over the corset, numerous petticoats were worn to create the desired volume of the dress. These layers of fabric were heavy and got tangled under the feet when walking. A special rigid frame called a tournier was attached to the lower back to hold the skirt in shape. This entire multi-layered structure weighed several kilograms and constantly pulled downward. Ladies were forced to carry this heavy burden on their bodies throughout the long evening. Outer dresses were made of thick velvet, heavy silk, or expensive brocade. The fabrics were almost airtight, creating a thermos-like effect around a woman's body. Combined with the heat from fireplaces and lamps, this led to severe overheating. Women constantly fanned themselves, trying to cool their faces and necks even slightly. However, removing even the smallest part of this outfit in public was absolutely unthinkable.
We must be patient.
Men at formal dinners had it no easier than the invited ladies. A mandatory part of the evening attire was a stiff, starched collar that fit tightly around the neck. This collar was as hard as cardboard and dug painfully into the skin when turning. Men were forced to hold their chins unnaturally high to avoid irritation and cuts. This gave their posture an arrogant, yet extremely tense and very stiff appearance. Frock coats and tailcoats were made of thick wool lined with horsehair. The clothing had to fit perfectly, like a second skin, without a single extra fold. Raising one's arms or bending sharply in such a suit was practically impossible. Gentlemen moved measuredly and cautiously so as not to damage the expensive fabrics at the seams. Their movements resembled those of mechanical dolls locked in the stiff woolen cases. Footwear also caused the guests a great deal of discomfort throughout the entire event. Ladies' shoes were made narrow so that the foot would appear petite and as graceful as possible. The stiff leather rubbed the feet severely, causing pain with every step across the hall. Men's patent leather boots were no less stiff and completely airtight. Sitting for several hours in such shoes was a true test of one's endurance. Gloves were a mandatory part of the evening attire for absolutely all guests at the reception. Women's gloves often reached above the elbow and were made of the finest kid leather. They fit tightly around the hands, disrupting normal blood circulation and causing a tingling sensation in the fingers. Removing gloves was permitted only during the meal itself at the table. After dinner, they had to be put back on immediately, despite hands that were damp from the heat. Feigning among ladies was considered perfectly normal and even expected at receptions. The causes were tight corsets, intense heat, lack of oxygen, and the weight of multi-layered clothing. Hosts always kept smelling salts on hand in case of such frequent mishaps. A feigning guest was quietly led out of the room so as not to interrupt the general social merriment. After receiving assistance, she was obliged to return to the table and continue the evening. The heavy gowns turned guests into beautiful but utterly helpless captives of etiquette. The beauty of Victorian fashion demanded enormous physical sacrifices from everyone present. Every movement required effort, and the luxurious, shimmering fabrics brought only hidden suffering. Would you like to try on such a heavy outfit for the sake of a single formal evening? In the next chapter, you will learn about the invisible social rules that greatly complicated these gatherings. Constant vigilance over every action exhausted the guests more than the heavy clothing. Victorian society was governed by thousands of unwritten rules that strictly regulated absolutely everything. A breach of etiquette could permanently ruin a person's reputation in high society. At a dinner party, every guest was under the close scrutiny of everyone else present. This created an incredibly tense atmosphere of covert observation and strict mutual evaluation. Seating arrangements at the table were determined by a strict hierarchy of titles and accumulated wealth. Guests could not choose who to sit with throughout the long evening. The host carefully planned the seating to avoid offending anyone's fragile social standing. Often, neighbors turned out to be people who were completely indifferent or hostile toward one another. However, etiquette required maintaining a lively and polite conversation with both neighbors in turn. There was an unbreakable rule about switching conversation partners, which had to be strictly observed. During the first half of the dinner, a guest conversed with the person sitting to their right. In the middle of the meal, at an invisible signal from the hostess, everyone would simultaneously turn smoothly. The second half of the evening was to be devoted to the neighbor sitting peacefully on the left. To break this rhythm meant demonstrating the deepest ignorance and mortally offending one's conversation partner. Topics of conversation at the table were subject to the strictest internal censorship by the guests themselves. It was forbidden to speak of politics, religion, illness, or personal financial difficulties. Only light conversation about art, the weather, recent theater premieres, and travel was permitted. The conversation had to be even-keeled, without intense emotions or overly loud laughter. Maintaining such a superficial yet intelligent conversation for hours was a complex intellectual task. Using the vast array of cutlery was a true test of good manners. It was very easy to get confused among the numerous forks for fish, meat, and dessert. A mistake drew scornful glances from the footmen and disapproving whispers from the other distinguished guests. An incorrectly folded napkin or the loud clatter of a knife against a plate was considered a true disaster. The guests' attention was focused more on the mechanics of eating than on the taste itself. Women were subject to even stricter scrutiny than the men invited to the reception. They were not permitted to voice their opinions loudly or argue heatedly with their conversation partners. The ideal guest was expected to listen attentively, smile sweetly, and meekly agree with the gentleman. The ladies' appetites were expected to appear modest, as if they were living on air alone. Eating a large portion of roast meat was considered the height of vulgarity and complete lack of manners for a woman. The hosts of the evening bore the heaviest burden of responsibility for the event's overall success. They had to discreetly manage a large staff of servants and smoothly steer the conversation. The hostess made sure that no guest felt neglected. At the same time, she had to maintain a serene demeanor, as if everything were happening all by itself. The slightest hiccup in the kitchen instantly reflected on her reputation as the perfect hostess. The fear of embarrassment hung in the stuffy air of the dining room as a constant, invisible, heavy threat. A single careless word could spark endless gossip the very next day. People were terrified of dropping food on the tablecloth, spilling wine, or mispronouncing a surname. The internal tension forced guests to sit unnaturally straight and control their every gesture. This psychological pressure deprived people of the opportunity to simply enjoy good company. The servants, standing silently behind the guests' backs, heard and noticed everything perfectly well. They were invisible witnesses to all the aristocrats' conversations, mistakes, and secret glances. Information gathered by the footmen at the table quickly spread to other wealthy city homes. The guests understood this and tried not to discuss anything important in the presence of the listening servants. The presence of prying ears made the evening's atmosphere even more formal and highly strained. A dinner party was a kind of battlefield where manners were the only weapon. Successfully passing this test confirmed a person's membership in the upper class of society. But the price of this success was immense nervous exhaustion by the end of the evening. People left the dining room drained, having brilliantly played their complex roles in the performance. Society demanded perfection, showing absolutely no forgiveness for even the slightest weaknesses or sincere outbursts.
The news from London is quite thrilling.
Behind the facade of strict rules and restraint, ordinary human vices were often hidden. Alcohol played an important role in relieving the immense tension of high society dinner parties. Wine was served with every course, and the footmen refilled the glasses completely unnoticed. Men consumed alcohol in vast quantities to unwind after a long, stressful day. By the middle of the feast, many gentlemen were already struggling to maintain the posture required by etiquette. Ladies were not supposed to drink much in public. It was considered deeply improper behavior. However, many women secretly asked their servants to pour them strong liqueurs or sherry. This helped them endure the pain of tight corsets and the boredom of superficial conversation. As the guests became tipsy, they gradually lost control of their carefully rehearsed manners. Voices in the dining room grew louder, and laughter lost its original aristocratic restraint. Under the influence of strong drinks, hidden social and deep personal conflicts burst to the surface. Polite conversation could suddenly escalate into a scathing exchange of barbs between longtime enemies. Words were chosen so as to formally remain within the strict bounds of social propriety. But the tone and veiled insinuations dealt cruel blows to the opponent's inflated egos. Those around them watched these verbal duels with great interest, maintaining impassive expressions. Gossip was the main currency of high society, and the wine loosened the guests' tongues considerably. People whispered about financial collapses, love affairs, and the family secrets of their acquaintances. Information spread quickly, growing on the fly with new, often fabricated scandalous details. It was difficult for the host to put a stop to such conversations without violating the rules of polite hospitality. The dining room turned into a hub for generating rumors that the entire vast city would learn about the next day. Infidelities and secret romances also found their way into the formal dinner. Lovers used a complex system of subtle glances, gestures, and movements of cutlery. A napkin dropped by accident or a particular tilt of the head could serve as a clear secret signal. Those around them often noticed this silent game, adding to their arsenal of future sensational gossip. The tension between spouses hiding their infidelities made the atmosphere in the room highly charged. Sometimes it came down to quiet, yet very harsh and quite cruel humiliations. A person who had lost influence or money might be demonstratively ignored at the shared table. They were asked extremely uncomfortable questions, placing them in the most awkward position possible in front of society. Etiquette did not allow the victim to openly protest or simply get up and leave. They had to silently endure the mockery, swallowing their resentment along with the expensive wine and desserts. Men often looked forward with great impatience to the end of the meal shared with the ladies. According to the rules, after dessert, the women would leave the dining room and retire to a separate drawing room. The gentlemen remained at the table alone to fully enjoy port, cognac, and cigars. In this all-male company, the rules of etiquette became considerably more relaxed. Conversations turned to politics, business, and discussions of the city's scandalous gossip. In this private atmosphere, important deals were often struck and successful careers were ruined. The amount of hard liquor consumed at this hour increased many times over without the supervision of the women. Some guests would get so drunk that they could barely stand on their own 2 feet. The footman had to discreetly escort them out through the mansion's back doors, away from prying eyes. This was considered normal for gentlemen, provided it all happened without unnecessary public fuss. Meanwhile, the ladies were bored in the drawing room, waiting for their reveling husbands to return. They drank tea, discussed fashion, and exchanged their own society news. Fatigue was setting in, but lying down on the sofa or slouching was strictly forbidden. They were obliged to maintain a perfect appearance until the very end of this long evening. The wait often stretched on for a full hour, testing the limits of the ladies' fragile patience. The guest reunion in the parlor served as a signal that the long reception was nearing its end. The men, flushed from port wine, tried to regain a respectable appearance before the ladies present. Often this looked comical, but no one dared to point it out openly. The perfect picture of a Victorian dinner was bursting at the seams under the pressure of true human nature. Behind the outward luxury lay the fatigue, intrigues, and weaknesses inherent in people of any era. The dining room surroundings also worked against the comfort of the invited society guests. Victorian-era furniture was renowned for its massiveness, imposing presence, and the incredible weight of its details. Chairs were made of hardwood with a high, perfectly straight, and rigid backrest. They were designed to force a person to maintain perfect, upright posture. Leaning back to give one's tired lower back a rest was physically impossible and considered improper. The sharp edges of massive oak tables painfully cut into the hands of the unwary. The huge table legs, richly decorated with intricate carvings, prevented guests from positioning their legs comfortably. There was a catastrophic lack of space under the table for long dresses and men's boots. Guests had to sit in tense positions, trying not to bump into their neighbor below. This static muscle tension added immense physical suffering by the end of a long evening. The center of the table was always adorned with bulky decorative arrangements made of expensive silver and crystal. These multi-tiered candelabras and enormous vases of fruit completely blocked the diner's view. One had to speak to the person sitting across the table through narrow gaps between the flowers. Constantly turning one's head to maintain eye contact was extremely tiring for the neck. The decor served to display wealth, with no regard for the simple convenience of social interaction. The silver trays and plates glinted intensely in the bright light of the gas lamps. The reflected light shone directly into the guests' eyes, causing irritation and severe eye strain. Combined with the general dimness in the corners of the room, this created a heavy visual environment. They had to squint to look at the food and cutlery, straining their facial muscles. By the end of the evening, many were getting migraines from these endless, bright, sharp glare. The heavy carpets on the floor muffled the sound of footsteps, but created their own additional problems. It was incredibly difficult to pull the chairs away from the table because of the thick woolen pile. The footmen had to exert tremendous effort to help the ladies take their seats. The slightest movement of a chair was accompanied by awkward jerks and the risk of tearing the hem of a long dress. Guests felt chained to their seats by these heavy, immovable wooden shackles. In pursuit of fashion, the hosts often used questionable materials in the interior. The bright emerald-colored wallpaper often contained harmful chemical pigments. Fine dust from this wallpaper settled imperceptibly in the stuffy air of the dining room. Prolonged exposure to such rooms gradually undermined the well-being of regular guests at formal gatherings. The room's luxurious appearance concealed an invisible, yet very real threat. The dining room's huge floor-to-ceiling windows let in strong nighttime drafts. Even closed window frames offered no protection from the streams of cold air blowing at people's feet. The temperature difference between the sweltering upper part of the room and the icy floor was enormous. The women in their delicate shoes were freezing, but there was nothing they could do about it. This constant struggle against the cold below and the heat above completely wore people out. The tableware was so heavy that passing it along required considerable physical effort. The cast silver soup tureens weighed several kilograms even without soup in them. The servants grew very tired carrying these heavy loads, and their movements lost their smoothness. The risk of a heavy dish falling onto someone's lap was always high. The clatter of heavy cutlery against porcelain created a constant, ear-splitting background noise. The space between the chairs was minimal, to accommodate as many guests as possible. Neighbors' elbows constantly bumped as they tried to cut a piece of meat from their portion. One had to press one's hands tightly against the body, making unnatural and very small movements with the knife. This stripped the dining experience of its last shreds of comfort and any physical pleasure. The table resembled an overcrowded carriage, where everyone was fighting for a tiny bit of personal space. The interior of the Victorian dining room was designed to be admired, not for everyday living. Objects were valued far more highly than the mere comfort and well-being of the guests invited into the home. People became mere accessories to this heavy, expensive, and monumental setting. Guests meekly endured all the interior's inconveniences, submitting to the strict laws of high society. Objects dictated their own rules, turning people into hostages of the fashionable Victorian style. The most exhausting part of a dinner party was the complicated process of bringing it to a close. Even when the food had been completely eaten, simply getting up and leaving was strictly forbidden. Etiquette demanded a long, polite conversation in the drawing room before the final farewell. People already on the verge of physical exhaustion were forced to keep playing their roles. Smiles grew increasingly forced, and phrases lost all meaning and liveliness. There was a strict order of departure according to which guests could leave the host's home. Those with the highest social status or a noble title always left first. The rest were obliged to wait patiently until the distinguished guests had taken their leave of the hosts. Any attempt to leave early was regarded as a gross insult to the aristocracy present in the hall. This hierarchical pause could last over an hour, exhausting the waiting guests to the limit. Calling the carriages to the mansion's doors created an incredible commotion on the night street. Footmen shouted the guests' names loudly into the darkness, trying to find the right coachman in the crowd. In bad weather, the horses grew very nervous, and carriages collided in the narrow city alleys. Guests stood in the cold halls, waiting for their carriages to be brought right up to the porch. The contrast between the stuffy drawing room and the cold air of the vestibule caused a strong, nervous shiver. The farewell ritual with the hosts required the obligatory exchange of elaborate, drawn-out compliments. One had to thank them for the wonderful evening, praise the food, and exchange polite pleasantries. This had to be said sincerely, carefully concealing the deep fatigue and irritation in one's voice. The hosts also stood at the door, shaking dozens of hands and smiling at everyone as they left. This was the final, most difficult act of the social performance for both exhausted parties. Putting on outerwear turned into a long and rather uncomfortable procedure for the ladies. Maids helped them carefully drape heavy woolen cloaks over the voluminous sleeves of their evening gowns.
I am just so tired.
Wrapping themselves up without ruining their elaborate hairstyles required incredible care and skill. The men put on top hats and heavy coats, mentally preparing to step out onto the night streets.
We are honored.
Everyone was eager to leave the house as soon as possible, but they moved deliberately, slowly, and smoothly. The ride home in the cold, bumpy carriage did nothing to bring the long-awaited relief. The streets of Victorian London were dark, dirty, and paved with uneven, rough cobblestones. The carriage rocked violently, causing pain in the passengers' straight backs, already weary from sitting so long. The suspension system of the old carriages handled the potholes on the poor roads extremely poorly. This journey became the final physical ordeal of a long and arduous social evening. Upon returning to their homes, the aristocrats faced the necessity of removing their formal attire. This process took a long time and required the indispensable assistance of sleepy, exhausted maids. Removing the tight corset, untying dozens of laces, and unbuttoning the buttons was a difficult task. After being freed from the pressure of the corset, women often experienced severe pain in their ribs. The body, having been confined for a long time in an artificial shell, struggled to return to normal. Men shed their stiff collars with great relief. They left red marks on the neck. They locked themselves in their studies to drink some water and finally relax in solitude. The luxurious clothing was handed over to the servants for cleaning, scrubbing, and airing out the next day. The house fell silent, giving the exhausted people a long-awaited chance to simply close their eyes. It took people a very long time to recover their physical and mental strength after such evenings. The next morning, Etiquette demanded the mandatory mailing of calling cards with a written thank you note. Footmen delivered small envelopes to the homes of the previous night's hosts as a mark of social courtesy.
I never thought it would come to this.
To forget this simple rule meant to undo all the efforts of the previous night's lavish dinner. Life in high society was an endless cycle of such incredibly complex obligations. To refuse to participate in them meant to become a social outcast in one circle forever. Dinner parties were a true test of endurance, hidden behind luxurious facades. They were hours of hard labor, pretense, physical discomfort, and constant nervous tension. Only a few truly enjoyed this endless parade of vanity and very strict rules. The splendor of the Victorian era demanded incredible sacrifices from people in order to maintain their status. The true cost of this status was measured in lost energy and tears hidden from everyone. We've only touched on a small fraction of the hardships hidden behind the beautiful facade of 19th century formal banquets. Do you think you could endure even one such evening while maintaining a flawless social smile? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're very interested in your opinion about this harsh era. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to continue uncovering the unexpected secrets of the past with us.